Okay, so we've started to use Bootstrap to do some layout. It's at a basic level right now, but there's some improvements we want to do. We want to customize this a bit. We want to make it look a little nicer. So what do we do next when it comes to doing that? Well, what I would generally do is I would look at what we've got, which has some very basic styles in it, and just kind of brainstorm, like, what do we want it to look like? I wouldn't mind if this calculator input wasn't like the whole width of the page. That would be nice. These buttons have some space on the left and right, but they don't have space up and down, so that's a bit of an issue. And they're all on top of each other. It would be nice if they were back in that kind of column layout that we had them in before. So maybe we can try giving that stuff a shot. And to do this, we're going to do a lot of things with the grid system in Bootstrap. So there's a lot of power in this, but it's also a lot of HTML, and it can get a little bit confusing. So we're going to try taking it slow, try moving along. So I've come over here in Bootstrap to the grid system. It gives you some information about how to do these column layouts. So I've already added, I realized because I'm just redoing this video because the last one got confusing. I had already added the container here. The container is just without this. We can see if I remove this container, we're all stuck up against the edge. We don't really like that. We want there to be some space. So here, the first thing in a layout is a bit about how containers work. Basically, they just move the content off the edge of the page and keep them inside a nice little div that we can start with. So next up is the grid system. So we're going to be using these things, rows and columns. So in Bootstrap, we can define rows and columns just using HTML. We don't have to write the CSS for it. So first of all, because I have a lot of HTML already here, it's going to get really confusing if I try to, like I actually did in the previous video on why I'm redoing this. It gets really confusing if we try to like put this in with our existing HTML. We have to find out like, okay, I pasted in the start of those divs, but when do they end so I can close them at the right place? And since we already have all these divs going on and it's really crazy, it's a little easier if we kind of just like create a little template for ourselves and then plug in the pieces of HTML that we need after that. It'll be a lot easier. Just roll with me on this one. So we're going to make a big empty space here. When we save it, removes all that space because we're not using our own code editor yet. We will be doing that very soon. All right, so we're going to be adding rows and columns. So let's just try pasting in this whole thing here. We'll just take that, rows and columns. We already have the outside container right there. We save that and we reload and we see there's column, column, and column. Okay, so I wouldn't mind if our calculator width was just inside this one column here. So what I can do is maybe I can remove the text from these other columns, first of all, and we can see the column, it's still there. We don't know if it's full width, but we can actually inspect it. And we can see, okay, the column is that wide, the next one's that wide. They're still there, they're just empty. Okay, so let's move in our text input. We're gonna just move in just the text input. Okay, great. Put it there, boom. Now we load that. And cool, it's the full width of just that one element because by default, Bootstrap makes it 100% width. We can see that here with this little form control thing. It makes it 100% width by default. Cool. So next we want to figure out how we're going to do our buttons. Well, I want there to be like 3 columns of buttons. This column, and this column. So to do that, we're again going to use this row and column thing, except we're going to put it all inside this existing column, like that, like underneath the text input. So if I save that, reload, we'll see now this is subdivided into 3 columns inside itself. Okay, so this one could hold the buttons, this one could hold the operations, this one could hold the equals. Now, maybe I don't want them all the same size. Okay, so what do I do with that? Well, there's lots of things we can do. There's lots of options for how wide to make different columns, and Bootstrap gives you some ideas here. Oh, okay, I have these special things that can variable width the columns, and there's all these crazy classes that you have to experiment with. I find them to be sometimes a little confusing, but some easy ones is to think of Bootstrap as always having a value of 12 for the whole width. I don't know why it's 12, but it is. But you can see here column 8 takes up here this much, and column 4 takes up this much. So this divides it into, 12 divided by 8 and 12 divided by 4. So yeah, you get these two different sections in it. So we can use this column thing to separate out our own columns into the widths we want. So I think this first one, we could have it be, I don't know, like, we could try it being this like column, let's see, column 7. Now let's do column 8 for it. And then we do column, we need it to all add up to 12. So we make it column 2 and column 2. And when I reload, we see that this one's quite wide, and then there's two smaller ones. That's a bit more like what we want. Okay, so that's some basic stuff there. Now we want to plug in our buttons here. So first of all, we can come in and grab all our number buttons like that. Okay, number buttons. We paste them in there. Okay, great. So they're all in. We save that. We reload. Now they're in that column. Okay, we come back and we're going to grab the these buttons, these like operations buttons, and put them in the column 2. Okay, and then we're going to grab these other operations buttons, whatever, and put them in column 3. Okay, now we can reload, and cool, we have these buttons and they're all in the right place. It still doesn't, I don't really like the layout that much. We could change a couple more things about it. So what else do we want to change? Maybe these buttons could be larger. Maybe this layout, I don't actually like it at the end of the day. Let's see what else we can do with the buttons. So for buttons, here we are. On the right hand side here, it has sizes. There's a lot to learn with all this, and you can add large. So it says add this class button large. So we're going to add that to some of our number buttons. Button large, button large, button large. Okay, let's see how that looks. Oh, that's actually pretty nice. That's a good idea. So button large, button large, button large. And we just have to paste that in all the way down. Okay, and we load that. Okay, that's looking a little bit nicer there. And I think in the end that column 8 is probably too wide. Maybe we should have it be column 6. And the other ones would be then column 3 and column 3. So if we reload that way, that's a little bit better. These are still kind of weird how they're like different sizes, but we can experiment with that. Another thing we want to do is that we don't really like how these have no like height space between them. So there's a couple ways to do that. We could dig into the whole grid and see how it works in terms of like columns and rows and blah, 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 blah. There's this thing called gutters, which is kind of cool, the horizontal gutters. But just to demonstrate the concept, we're going to show how it is to write our own custom CSS on top of this. So we have our CSS file, which right now we've actually commented out, so it doesn't load. So we're going to let that load again. And first of all, let's just let it load again and see what happens at all. Okay, we get it. Like a whole bunch of stuff goes a little wrong, right? Like the buttons do get the right width, but they're off center. The text input is weird. There's this random gray bar. So there's some of our CSS that is screwing this up now. So what we're going to do, I'm just going to delete like all this CSS, and we're going to work with it kind of from fresh here. So we're going to delete all that, and it's going to go back to looking like Bootstrap again. Now, I want to add some margin around these. So I have these number buttons, and actually pretty much all the buttons I want to have some margin. Maybe some margin on the top because I want them to have some distance here. So let's just try saying button, and maybe we'll be a little more specific because we don't want it to change any button on the page ever. We maybe just want it to change the buttons in our main area. So we could say for the container that, where is it? The container is also our Mapster calculator. Okay, so that gives us our own little class that we can work with to overwrite Bootstrap without messing with the defaults. So Mapster calculator button, and now we say margin top, let's say 5 pixels. Okay, we try that. That is looking a little nicer, like it gives that little bit of space. These all kind of look a little nicer. Okay, that's a start. Now, the width of the buttons, I also don't like that these buttons are kind of a weird width that doesn't make sense. Now, I don't want to make too often rules that apply to every single button on the page. So I'm going to inspect here and see maybe I can give this div a class, and then I can make some kind of minimum width or set width like we did last time for just these buttons in particular. So let's go in there to our CSS. Actually, we have to go back to our HTML to add that class. So we go here, class equals operations buttons, which we actually did define in some of our extra stuff, which I'm just gonna get rid of all our extra HTML. Operations buttons. Okay, so we have a special class for that now. We say operations buttons, button, and we say width. Let's just make it like 50 pixels and see what happens. So we load it. They're a little too wide. Maybe we can make it a little less wide. We make it 40 pixels. And that's looking a little bit nicer. You know, this layout could still be better. These things could be more tightly arranged. Maybe we could make this column a little bit different. But this is a good start. We've done a little bit of customizing of Bootstrap. We've added some nice little buttons, and our functionality is still actually there, which is kind of cool. Because we've just changed the HTML and CSS. We haven't really changed any JavaScript. Now, the last little thing here is I mentioned how Bootstrap like just magically takes care of mobile, but you'll see on the side here that this thing by width is all screwed up. It's not just taking care of mobile. If we go wider and wider, we eventually see our own page, but the width didn't just work out. Okay, so that's a bit more advanced topic. You do have to kind of tell it a couple instructions for how to break it down in mobile. I'm not going to go over that here. Mobile is very important. I would recommend that you take some time to look into that. But for our mapping stuff, we're not going to need this like exact kind of Bootstrap stuff. So I'm going to set it aside for now. Definitely something to pay attention to, make a note of, to maybe look up a little if you're just doing a general website. You do want to make sure that you figure out how things work in mobile on when it comes to web development. We're going to touch on mobile for sure with mapping, but it's not going to deal a lot with this like columns type stuff. So anyway, there we are. We've done some basic stuff with Bootstrap. We've done a little bit of layout, and we're going to move on to a couple other things to do with linking up pages and getting a little further along in the next video. See you there.